This is CannaBiz Conversations. I am your fortunate and lucky host today, Sean Welsh. This is a fun show for me because I get a chance to talk to a lot of really cool people. I know a lot of really cool people, and they've introduced me to cool people. But today is unique because this is what I like to call a social media feed relationship thus far. And today is really the first time getting to chat with this individual since he came into my feed. And I'm really, really, really excited to do it. Seth Yakatan, how are you, man?
I'm awesome. Thank you. How you doing, man?
Thank you. Thank you for taking time to do the show. I know you're a busy man. You have lots going on. So we'll jump right into it, man. Tell us, what is Seth's cannabis origin story? When did you first find the plant? And then how did you, or when did you realize that it had value upon, potentially just being something you got high with?
Well, I think I first found the plant when I was probably 18 years old. I was a sophomore in college. I had never really done anything, um, and everyone around me was using the plant. Um, and I started using the plant, and it was pretty incredible. Um, it really wasn't probably until much later that I saw what I would call the real therapeutic applications of it, and that really came principally from a biopharmaceutical perspective, which is where I've spent a lot of my life in that industry. I think I was turned on to a company called GW Pharmaceuticals, probably in 2003 or 2004, and they are one of the few, if not the only people who have been able to take the plant and turned it into an FDA-regulated medicine. And so that's kind of where my whole journey began.
Wow. I mean, you're talking, so 18, again, I think as plant goers go, right? 18 sounds almost a little late, Seth. I don't know why I think that. It seems weird to even say to you. But previous to that, is it something that you had just kind of not been around, or something you just chose to avoid? I'm not trying to get too personal on you. I just am interested in the age range. That's all.
I was a bit of a late bloomer. I was pushed ahead as opposed to being pushed behind. So I literally graduated high school when I was 17, and my dad, uh, uh, who I worked with for a long time, grew up in an orphanage, and he was a pretty hard dude. So I really didn't party that much when I
Oh,
was younger. It wasn't
yeah.
really until I got to college where I was like, oh, okay, I can do this and I'm not going to get in trouble. So it was really more just about kind of it wasn't really about proximity. I think it was just more about the way that I was raised and the environment that I grew up in. So
Yeah, and I think that's a really what I'm fascinated about with that point is that when you talk about the relationship with our parents to where it puts us on the spectrum, right, and gets us involved with that. Your dad has the upbringing he has. You end up with that, sort of background story, and it's a heads down attitude. And like you said, hard guy. I can respect the hell out of that. So you're able to come into this plant at 18, know that it has value later on in life. When you say you were involved with biopharmacy or biopharmaceuticals, was that your industry at the time, or was it a side, kind of interest? You sort of mentioned that, and then we go into the pharmaceutical company. I just want to make sure I understood if you
I
worked
can
there or
I
if it was part of the passion.
all of it. So I want to go back and bring up one point on your last topic though, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
You got to understand something. I'm 53 years old. I'm assuming you're in your 30s.
Thank you very much for that. I
You got
appreciate
it.
that. I am in my 40s, but I
Okay.
thank you for that. Thank you.
But still, you grew up at a time where cannabis was not legal. So,
Yeah.
also driving my consideration around my decision to use or not use cannabis when I was 17 or 18 years old was I didn't want to go to jail.
Yeah.
And people that are younger now don't realize that if you got pulled over by the police at any point kind of before 2005 and you
Yeah.
even had a roach in your ashtray, they were going to throw you in jail, right? So the other part that kind of drove, I think, my aversion towards cannabis use was the fact that it was also heavily enforced in a way that things just aren't enforced these days. So there was also kind of a binding constraint where you've now seen in the last 20 or 25 years a liberalization and a legalization and a democratization of the plant that did not exist.
Yeah,
So
thank you for making that circle back, Seth. Guy, it is an important point that I have already forgotten to that extent, right? I forget. I talk about it. We talk about it here in the state of Wisconsin. We're in an island of prohibition here. We're surrounded by legal states. Our state is not. Our state likely isn't, with all of their arguing. And so with it, we talk about the most dangerous thing about cannabis is the fact that it's illegal. And I think that's sort of the point that I come back to as a youth and think about is that it was so scary everywhere you went, everything you hid, you did it, and you really were still behind the scenes. But even today, while it might be legal to buy the plant, it's not like you can walk down the street and smoke a joint, Seth. It's not like you can be public about it to that extent anyways, right? Which I think is a little bit still I don't want to say ridiculous because I want to realize how far the movement's come, but I do find it to be interesting how
I would
it's still behind the scenes.
I would disagree with that a little bit. I think it
Okay.
depends upon the domain and the municipality that you're in. There, there are plenty of places where I've been, Southern California, New York City, Colorado, where in Jersey, where the smell of cannabis is in the air and is pungent. So I think there's less of a bit of an aversion, but yeah, I still think consumption is still something which is done largely in a more private, one-off kind of environment. So let's go to your second question about pharmaceuticals. I'm an investment person. I spent 15 years professionally investing capital for funds and for a large bank. In 2001, I stopped doing that and I started advising biotech and life sciences companies. Sorry about that. Let
All
me
right.
just turn my thing off. Sorry, I just got a call and it went to my laptop and I didn't
Please,
turn it
all
off.
good, man. You're a busy man. Don't you worry about a thing. We're all good here.
So in 2001, I founded a consulting firm called Caton Associates, still around today, that's really focused on therapeutic drug development companies, device companies, diagnostic companies, and research products companies. So when I say I was in the pharmaceutical business, we help companies from kind of, early stage all the way to a couple $100 million of value to scale and raise capital and undertake transactions to bring things in and push things out of the company with global major pharmaceutical companies. So I've personally led the effort to out-license or to partner 8 drugs, like 8 pharmaceutical or biotech drugs. So when I say I was in the business, like I was in the business, I still am. I go to the single largest, life science investor conference in January in San Francisco every year. So it was from that lens that I really came to the plant with real pharmaceutical understanding. I don't know if I have any expertise, but definitely understanding. So
And so now, is that sort of what you do? I mean, are you combining that passion and the understanding of that now to see and seek out where to put capital in this industry currently? Because I know I checked out your feed. You've been to you go to the big shows. You're a guy who's kind of around. When you're looking at investment opportunities, are you looking for people that can sort of do more with it because of your background? Does that have a part in your investment strategy?
yes and no. I want to make kind of 2 caveats. I'm not a huge investor. I'm a much bigger doer and advisor. The things that I tend to invest in don't really work. So I usually help people that either want to get capital or want to sell or want to grow. It's where I'm better suited.
Got
To
it.
answer your question, I tried from 2012 until about 2018 to focus exclusively on the pharmaceutical side of the commercialization of cannabis. So I started a company. I raised it $43 million. I licensed 3 molecules from Raphael Mechoulam, and I tried to figure out a way to turn cannabis medicine, for lack of a better description, into an FDA-regulated product. I failed. I got involved in a second company, which didn't really do that well, except it did for a period of time from a stock perspective. And then I tried to do a third one and I couldn't get that one done. And then I said, okay, this is just too hard. So I tried to do that in 2019. I kept ramming into this company called Ease. And Ease, if you're not familiar with it, is the largest delivery company in the world and probably the single largest consumer platform for cannabis purchasing in California. And I got involved in Ease to help them to raise money. And over 10 quarters, I was helpful in that regard. But what I learned, so for 6 or 7 years, just to be transparent, what I wanted to do is I wanted to find a way to turn a $7 pre-roll into a $70 pharmaceutical product. So take it from the front of the house to behind the prescription desk. I couldn't figure out how to do that. It's really, really, really hard for a number of reasons. And when I started working at Ease, I realized how huge the consumer market was. I realized how important the consumer market was. And I realized, honestly, that consumers didn't care as much about what I would call pharmacovigilance or pharmacodynamics of a product in the same way that they might from a prescription medicine. And I started to focus more and more and more on just the consumer market of cannabis. So when I'm involved in cannabis, I'm really much more involved in companies that are growing, producing, distributing, or around that universe. The the canna pharmaceutical world is still really challenging, and just I haven't found anything that has necessarily truly broken
Right.
through there yet.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, man, I'm happy to have people like you who take chances, take swings, try to think, get things figured out. I've done the same thing. I failed, not nearly in a way of raising capital like that or like having to be in that situation, but the stress and pressure, Seth, that comes with all of that. Let me ask you, as years of doing this, the guy who raises capital, guy who's responsible, not really, I mean, I don't know how far you feel your responsibility goes to the success of the capital you raise, but just in general, how do you deal with the stress of that, man? In being in obviously, as you said, raising a bunch of money, seeing a company fail. What has that been like for you on the mental health side, if you don't mind kind of going down that road? I hadn't planned on it, but I'm interested to hear your perspective.
That's a great question. I face it. Yeah. So I'll tell you, sometimes I feel like I am a master of the universe, and sometimes I feel like I am the sieve that drains the lowest sewer of the universe. So it just depends.
Is
I
that on the
think
day, Seth, or is that like, I mean, because that's a range, man. That is a range of emotion one goes through.
it's kind of like
Or is
it's
it is
kind of
it is it deal by deal? Is it moment by moment? How do you what brings you to those moments? Then I guess it would be
it
the next follow up.
it's sine wave in terms of how it works. I think to go back to to answer the last question, I used to watch a lot of football, and the best defensive back in the world is going to get beat, and you got to get up and you got to line up on the next play and forget about it. And that's kind of the approach that I think you have to take.
Yep, I
I
get it.
think in terms of what I do, I'm only as good as my last deal.
Truth.
And that's frustrating. The other thing that's frustrating is that I like to say to people, I'm really not that smart. I'm very lucky. I usually go out with kind of a half-baked hypothesis, and sometimes the hypothesis works. So I take, wet spaghetti sauce and spaghetti and I mix it around and I throw 100 strands against a wall. And if 6 stick, I got something. And sometimes 7 stick and sometimes none stick. And sometimes 11 stick when I don't think any are going to stick. So it's about the ability to get it done. And, today I'm at a point where we're working on 2 things and I can't get arrested shoplifting naked at Walmart on either of them. And they're both really good. And I'm sitting here going, what the fuck am I doing? Like, what's wrong? It just depends. It just depends. I think you just got to keep winding it up. And, it's kind of like baseball. You just got to stay in the batter's box and you're eventually going to connect. If I look at what I've done over the last 20 years, I've gotten a lot of things done. So
More wins
there's
than
something.
losses, right? And you don't know unless you swing. And at the end of the day, we were just talking about this the other day. This idea of perfection, this idea of it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Michael Jordan failed. The best of the best failed. The people who anyone puts at the top of any Mount Rushmore of any sport or anything in the world, they failed to get there. So the failure is the part of it. And I like the way that you talk about just having to keep going after it and keep saying to yourself, look, I'm going to try it. And Seth, you're clearly an idea guy, right? That's what I would refer to you as, and someone who's just constantly has those. And that's the part that I think most people sort of, I don't know, because I consider myself an idea guy. I think some people take it for granted in that way, where it's just like, well, what's the next idea? Well, fuck, man, to find a successful one it's not that easy. And so staying after it is a big part of it. So, all right, we've got the cannabis journey down, Seth. Let me now open it up to you because I know recently in the feed you've had a lot going on. You've got a lot of ideas about 2024. So I want to open it up to you for the last half of the show. What does Seth want everyone to know, or what are you passionate about that you want heard from the rooftops?
Probably two things. One is I think that the cannabis story is going to become more and more and more important in 2024. And I still don't think you're really out of the kind of spring training mode in cannabis yet. So I just think staying the course there and seeing how things change is going to be interesting. I have very little faith in elected officials these days in general. Something needs to be done to change the legal status of cannabis at a federal level. And until that occurs, the industry is going to be constrained. When that occurs, the industry is still going to be constrained. After that occurs, the industry is going to be constrained. But you need to start to see a change there for the industry to really flourish. And I'm hanging in there until it does.
Do
So
you have a
that's
preference on
probably the
which way
first
they
thing.
go there, Seth? Are you a scheduler, descheduler? Where I know everyone's, we're gonna bring it down, we're gonna move it up. What do we feel like from your perspective?
Sean, I'm pretty dumb. I'm a history major by training. So the only thing that I know how to do is really go back and look at what's happened to see if that's going to tell me what's going to happen in the future. And I'm not smart enough to say if this occurs, then that will happen. I'm a capitalist, good, bad, or indifferent. What I want whatever change that's going to allow a company like GTI or Trulieve to list on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. Whatever that means, whether that's safe banking, whether that's descheduling, whether it's rescheduling, whether it's unscheduling, I don't know. But whatever manifests probably that change, number one. And number two, whatever manifests or an elimination or a reduction of 280E. The rest of it, how that manifests and then what it means and how it interplays with the hemp market and how it impacts companies. I don't know how all that works, but I know if you give the industry real access to capital and you don't tie an arm behind its back with taxes, it's going to improve the collective situation. So that's probably my view.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that we have to. I'm a capitalist as well, and I've been getting some flack for it recently. Whatever, I'm fine with that. It's part of the game. I also do not trust elected officials. I don't give a shit what side they're on, where they're from, who they talk. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. None of it actually gets done. I live in a state where it's as obvious as it is the day is long that it should have legal cannabis, and you can't get anyone to agree on anything. So I'm with you there. As a small business owner myself, I could not imagine not having the benefits that my small business brings me from a taxation perspective as an individual. So it is one of the nastiest things about it, and the unfortunate thing about it is that This really before, like, because I was in Colorado just after medical, and we were medical growers, and I started my first company called Green Biz Done Better. We had a banking account. We put our money in the bank. We wholesaled kind of weed through that name, and it was just kind of cool. And no one said anything, and the bank was cool because we paid bills and kept money with them, and everything was fine. And now it's really obviously much bigger than that. And safe banking just seems, it seems obvious, but it seems, I don't know, like too obvious that people are going to have issue with the little stuff. So politics, Seth, I think ruin both the outlook on that. But I'm hoping we can get past all that, because you're right, the industry deserves a better direction. We have to find one.
Yeah, and hopefully, so back to the last question, I don't think any of those changes, no matter what happens, is the right fix. You know, the issue that you have in cannabis that you don't have in other industries is that you typically have a lot of non-people of color in tailored suits sitting inside of 20 or 30 companies that are the biggest in the industry, that are doing what, 100,000 people of color are incarcerated for historically. And I don't know what the quid pro quo is for that, but you have that aspect of this industry that, again, I don't know that you have in any other industry that I can think of.
No.
And I think that's part of the calculus. And it's a challenge, and at some point it's going to have to be changed. I also think that in cannabis, unlike many other industries I've seen, I'm in biotech. 7 out of every 10 companies fail. I don't care how good they are. I don't care how much money they raise. The drugs just don't work, or the drugs fail in the approval process. If the drug fails, there's nothing you can do. And there seems to be a legacy view in cannabis that laws should be set to be able to democratize winning. And one, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but secondarily, the regulatory framework that you've created doesn't allow for that. And I also don't think politicians are smart enough to retroactively go back and try to create law to correct that. So you kind of left with this dysfunction that is going to be inherent, and it's probably going to take 25 or 30 years to kind of settle.
That's the annoying part, is the politician. Every other day you read something about a politician when it comes to cannabis. I don't care if it's Florida. I don't care if it's issue out of Michigan. None of it matters. If people can find a way to do something, to get capital, to be a part of something, to have the fundraising, it will go through that arm. And you're right. The democratizing of winning is, it's not set up. None of this is set up right. The way the bidding process works, the way that any of this has happened in states that have gone legal recently is a little bit, it's frustrating, because you'd think enough framework would exist for people to be able to say, hey, this worked, that didn't work, this worked. Let's just implement this, right? And it just seems like every time they want to reinvent the wheel, do something else. But I don't think there's been enough about the social justice, right? Or the social equity part of it, man. I mean, immediately upon a state legalizing, immediately everyone who is in prison for this, for anything, I would say up into trafficking. I'm not trying to be an asshole here. I don't want to get into all that, but I mean, there's a level at which I still think even with 20 ounces, you should be able to get out. My point is, whoever's there with that should be released the moment a state legalizes. And I find it annoying that we are still acting like people are yeah, they had done something bad then, but retroactively, how can we not correct it, Seth? Like you said, we can't have the politicians do it. So how does it retroactively get done then?
No, I don't know. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. I'm Again, I would probably go back to look at other industries, and the best corollary that you have historically for cannabis in the United States is alcohol.
Yeah.
And there are still companies and sorry, there are still states which regulate alcohol on a state by state basis. So, exacerbating this social justice inequality issue in cannabis is also the fact that you have hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have spent, outside of the corporate people in suits, just operators who have spent $1 billion in testing and compliance and complying with local and state licensing regimes. And there's 33 different licensing regimes and maybe more, because when you go into municipalities and states, they're even different. So are you then also going to enact something which actually penalizes the people who have legitimately spent money and gone through a clean process to set up a business with a lot of constraints, because now you're trying to either figure out how to legalize or figure out how to compensate for injustice? That's a Pandora's box that I'm not going into. And I think if I look at, and I didn't want to prognosticate, but if I look at whatever happens federally, I, for one, don't see whatever occurring federally undoing what has been done at a state or a local level from a legislative perspective, only because states tend to legislate themselves, and that's the basic fundamental thesis of the Constitution and how the United States was founded, which is states have the ability to enact their own laws. And if we want to get geopolitical, there's several issues now which are swirling about outside of cannabis. With we could talk about female reproductive health. That you've seen how a group of people want to opine on that in the Supreme Court, and you see how people in individual electorates want to opine on that. And I don't see cannabis, necessarily being different. So we'll just see how it folds out. I don't have the ability to tell you how it's going to end. I think I just have the ability to sit there like an odds maker and say, these are the odds that I think it's going to work. And I'm going to bet on what I think is the best odds, kind of thing.
All right. Well, that brings me to the question then, because it's come up on the show a few times already this season. Federal legalization, yes, no, maybe in the next 20 years?
My view on legalization is that my tipping point for my timeline for legalization is 2030. So, if it happens by 2030, I'm in an amazing position. If it doesn't happen by 2030, I'm probably sitting in Laguna Beach and just making bracelets at that point. I'm not gonna wait that long. I think that I put out a post on LinkedIn, which is how we met yesterday, where I made some predictions for the year. And I think I had predicted, and I just want to make sure that I even know what I said. I think I had predicted that some kind of rescheduling occurs this year. I think that there seems to be a lot of momentum around that. I don't necessarily think either presidential candidate is great for multiple reasons. I think if one of them gets a brain, it's a hot button issue that could maybe swing votes in their direction. I keep hearing that DEA is going to come out with a memo and something's going to happen. I don't believe that. I'm optimistic that some kind of change happens this year, which sounds like Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, if I'm going to make a bet. And there's hundreds of people on LinkedIn who think that's the worst thing to ever happen. So I'm not going to go down that road either.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I stepped in the landmine. It happened on the last show, and it's at the end of the day, everyone has a reason for it. Some of it is because of how it affects other parts of the discussion within pharma, big pharma, legacy grower. It's I'm not either, so I don't have a direct opinion. I'm just a friend of both, and so I try to see both sides of what makes sense there.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I think there's a lot of conspiracy theories that you could archetype around cannabis and why it's not legal.
Sure.
I honestly think if I'm going to go down the conspiracy theory side of it, and I agree with conspiracy theorists, every other lobbying group is uniform, pretty discreet, and has 10 times more money than the cannabis lobbying group. So if you just want to go into a conspiracy as an industry, we don't have the firepower and we're really not organized like they are. So that's probably one of the reasons it hasn't happened. And because of all the things that we've talked about social equity issues and incarceration issues. Most of the agendas that have been pushed forward are trying to get everything done all at once, and I'm not sure that's how that process works. At least the results don't show that that's how it works. So there's definitely, you know, an argument to say this is why it's not happening, and you can come up with 7 reasons why it's not happening, and those are just 2 of them.
Well, and it's just like you talked about in the beginning, right? Is the idea that government, can't necessarily be trusted. And the problem is that the elected officials say one thing, but the people say another, and like I've told you, we live in Wisconsin here, and it's the people here by an overwhelming margin want legalization. Politicians want to argue about who can take responsibility. And I just see that sort of as a macro to a bigger issue at the federal level, as far as taking us down any sort of federal legalization. But your timeline of 2030, I mean, that seems fair enough, because what is that? Another election cycle and a half, right? Whatever. So that gives people enough time to say, hey, I guess because because it could be either way. It's going to be there will be new presidency at the end of the next 4 years, regardless, if I understand history. Is that right? Do I have that right, Seth? That even though you were a president one time, if you get elected again, it's still 2 terms. You can't do that anymore. Is that right?
That's what the law says,
Okay.
correct?
Okay.
But I'm not going to turn this into a political
Nope. Neither am I. I just wanted to document between you
campaign.
and I that that's the law on this show. That's all I was trying to do.
That's what the law says.
Okay.
Yes. The
Cool.
law says you can't serve as president of the United States for more than 2 terms.
Doesn't mean if it's consecutive, none of that matters. It's 2 terms and you're out. So just
doesn't matter if you want to be president for a 3rd term.
Yeah.
Or if you don't think that the election's correct. You're not allowed to.
All right, cool. All right. So it doesn't matter. So my point is that in that time frame, there will be a turnover there. And I wonder an interest of level of the, we say it all the time. You're in your 50s. We had Jeffrey Hoffman, cannabis lawyer of New York City, on the show. And he talked about how, look, man, at the end of the day, it's the youth. He's also in his 50s, I think he said. It's the youth has to get out, has to care, has to do more. Seth, do you have kids? I don't. Do you have kids? And is the issue of cannabis or anything like that, are they old enough to be in that discussion? And if so, what does it sound like at that perspective?
Yeah, I have an 18-year-old who's a freshman in college, and I have a 16-year-old who's a sophomore in high school. And the conversation there, it's also much different. I'm deeply involved in the cannabis industry. I have people coming over to my house with turkey bags. So the sensitization of them surrounding cannabis is much different than the sensitization around me surrounding cannabis, which is just like, it's here and it's okay, and maybe I'm going to use it. Whereas when I was a kid, it's here and it's really not okay. And if we're going to use it, we better not tell anybody. You got FOMO around it. So it's a little bit different these days.
Yeah, that's a full circle part of the discussion, though, right? I like that, because at the end of the day, your upbringing with your kids is different. Plus, they grew up. I mean, they're for the lack of a better term, you have an 18-year-old, 16-year-old. So coming into adulthood, as adults, they know nothing more than legal cannabis, right? I believe you do live in the Cali area. Do I have that right, Seth?
You're correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, they grew up with it, so it's not like they don't know anything about really it being illegal to that sense. That's something they've probably been desensitized to for longer than we're even aware of, since legality and working that way. So that's interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Seth, did we get to your second thing you wanted to discuss? I know we started with the cannabis story and how it will kind of change this year. Is there another outlook or something else that you want to put out to people?
Yeah, I think the second thing is probably follow me on LinkedIn, engage with me on LinkedIn, comment with what I'm doing on LinkedIn. That's a second thing. That's turned into its own whole beast for me these days, and that's been really, really, really interesting.
Kind of woke up a sleeping giant. I mean, it sounds like the story was you were here, you were there, you maybe took a little bit of a break, and now you came back, and now it's just you're hitting the gangbusters and everything's kind of coming together. Is that accurate, or did I miss something?
Feels like that. If we go back to where we started on that, I'm in the master of the universe, or I'm the sieve of the universe on a daily basis. I think LinkedIn makes me change that opinion. It's
See, that's why I just aim for about 50 to 50, yeah, 50 likes, maybe a couple of shares, maybe a couple of comments, because it's a sweet spot, because it's all pretty much good. You guys with the big numbers, you and that, you guys get so much attention that, dude, it's got to be crazy to have one part of your discussion go one direction and then have the other side of your comment section be the other side. It's insane. And then God forbid you mention the word capitalist, Seth. I mean, it's crazy what has happened. What do you attribute this to? Is this from a posting like a frequency? What do you give your recent sort of just tidal wave of social right now?
I think I just leaned in.
Yeah.
Part of my journey in the past couple of years, past 10, 15 years, is I used to be obstinate, forcing, I'm going to get this done. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to make 600 phone calls. I'm going to find the guy. I'm going to close this thing. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older, I've kind of changed that to kind of a methodology, which is kind of like, this is what I got, and you might like it. And if you don't, that's fine. But if you like it, let me know. And that sales process, for lack of a better
Yeah,
description,
man.
I think has really been a fundamental change in just me personally. And I think that's come through the LinkedIn growth. I think the other thing that's come through the LinkedIn growth is that in today's social media world, there seem to be a lot of people who are experts who haven't ever done anything,
Mm-hmm.
like truly accomplished anything, or that are just opinions. And I think the fact that, or that are just opinions that aren't really controversial, they're more educative. And I think the fact that I've actually done something more than once, and the fact that I'm not afraid to have an opinion, even if it offends you,
Mm-hmm.
I think that authenticity is at some level differentiated. And I think that's also kind of what's driven things. I also I also think, and there's not a lot of people who do this. I also think there's a guy who I spoke to yesterday who I like very much on LinkedIn. His name is David Paul. He has nothing to do with cannabis. He's just a venture investor in SaaS. He has a podcast also. And he really talks about, well, I had a meeting and here's what I think, or someone came to me with a pitch and here's what I really thought. I think that candid, hey, I'm going to tell you what's going on back here. It's not going to what we're going to tell you out here, but I'm going to tell you like how this happened or how we're thinking about it or what's going on. I also think that like deal level real world authenticity is something that a lot of people don't convey. And I think me sharing that has made people feel like I'm much more accessible. And I think that's been part of the reason that I've kind of grown. It's turned into a beast. It's turned into a beast.
Yeah, man,
And
it's the best thing I ever did for my company. I was doing the same thing, worried about making a million phone calls, trying to get people into the business, trying to do all these things, didn't have a sales department, did it all myself. And then finally, initially, we didn't really think I would be good on social media because I'm kind of an asshole and I kind of say what I feel, and most people are offended by what I say, blah, 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 blah. So my wife was like, I don't know if you want to grow your business that way. And then one day we all woke up, we're like, why not? And it was my concept was to, if you saw my stuff, kind of like you said, I was hoping to use it as a deterrent because I don't want to take wasted phone calls. So the hope was you watch my show and you were like, I would never work with this guy, which is perfect. Then you'll never watch the show again. I don't have to worry about you. But if you continue to engage, you continue to watch, then there's potential that you might agree with me. And you're right, bringing that. So what we did was we brought some of the dirtier side of our industry forward on some of the vendor stuff, and people were amazed we were talking about it. And so you doing it in cannabis, man, or you doing it from an investor level and really showing people through that lens, because investors, capital, these are, there's like the hottest words running, right, in cannabis for the most part, besides legalization and scheduling. And so it's something people want to know about. I know that when I talk to people about it, again, I've been much smaller side of this scale than yourself, it sounds like. But the point is I still have interest in what I'm getting involved in, what we're trying to help people do and grow with. And so to watch those from the inside out and to give that perspective, Seth, I think is just, it's priceless, man. So thank you for that. And I hope that that is something that you continue to really push hard on in the new year, because it's a big thing for people for sure.
I'm going to try to. I mean, it's also allowed me to develop new skills. I just went from being, a 53-year-old guy to being kind of part of this creator economy and being accepted by this group of young people that seem to be doing a lot of things that I don't know how to do. And I'm certainly trying to do them. And maybe I'm a little slower, but I'm really with kind of no expectations of what was going to happen in 2023 as it relates to LinkedIn. I had an amazing year, and I'm hopeful now that I can take that and scale the shit out of it. So we'll see if I can do that.
I'm gonna guess that you most certainly can. You continue doing what you've been doing and the way that you bring your message to it. Again, I've been on here regularly. We have my automotive podcast. We'll have done, by the time this show airs, we'll have done 300 episodes. We've delivered them 300 straight Mondays on LinkedIn. And it's not, I don't post every day. I don't post multiple times a day. I have a really specific schedule that I use. And so all my growth is really small, and it's been something that a lot of people ask me why. But for me, it's because I just need one person, one relationship, one thing to kind of make something good for me. I've been in the automotive space for a long time. I've been fortunate that I have my own resources, and I've had them for a long time. So to be able to meet new people and have interesting conversations like this today, Seth, I would have never met you. I would have never known to speak to you about cannabis had it not been for LinkedIn. And again, like I said, I just, in the last 30 days, your tidal wave of content and thoughts and the provocation of other people, what they think, how they go with it, it's been pretty cool, man. So best of luck really making that into a model for yourself moving forward.
Thank you. What's been kind of interesting there is that in certain areas, I've driven discussion from a lot of really important people in cannabis, and it's been nice to see that. And I think I've been able to highlight a more optimistic view and to articulate several stories of things where you have a company and it's actually working. So here's the model, like figure it out. And that's also been pretty good. So
I think, again, your background really lends its hand for people that, like you said, you've done it before, you've had success. You can bring that forward to people and say, look, this is what it looks like. This is how we can model. This is how we can grow and be consultative in that way. And again, I think the industry really, it needs honest voices. I think like any industry, I think there's people who come in, see the opportunity to money grab, see the opportunity to come in and just, as you said, the expert of nothing, they have never done it. And so that's why I quietly have come on to the cannabis scene, because I've been behind the scenes for a long time. I've never been public about it. And so I don't want to sit here and act like I have all the answers, because I don't. That's why I started this show, is because I want to get to know people and learn from people and see what opportunities the conversations bring us, right? So that's my whole goal of social media. Seth, any closing words from you before we wrap up, my friend?
No, appreciate the opportunity, appreciate the platform, Sean. Just hopeful for world peace in 2024.
Love the world peace. Seth, thank you so much for joining us, man. We appreciate it. And thank you for everyone watching. Remember, it is our joint effort to raise this plant to its rightful place in society. It's this show's goal. We hope it's your goal. We look forward to doing anything we can in the future to make that happen. Thank you guys so much, and have a wonderful week.